Well, everyone, welcome back to Storybox Podcast. Today, I'm delighted to welcome the unstoppable Kerwin Rae. Now, if you don't know who Kerwin is, he is Australia's leading business strategist and high performance specialist, helping over 100,000 plus businesses in over 154 different industries, throughout 11 countries worldwide, with his revolutionary no bulls approach to business growth and personal transformation. Unlike other coaches or consultants who offer entrepreneurs and growth seekers at best pieces of the puzzle, their events and programs have a comprehensive blueprint for success. Having failed nearly every subject at high school, something that I can relate to, battling addiction, something I can also relate to, and encountering near 6 near-death experience, I can relate to 3 near-death experiences myself, including a stroke which nearly killed you. Kerwin's ability to conquer the odds is second to none. Kerwin, I can go on and on and on about your unstoppable nature. You have an incredible podcast called Unstoppable. I just want to welcome you to the Storybox Podcast today.
Yes, brother. Really good to be here.
Thank you so much, man, for taking the time out of your very, very busy schedule.
It's good to be here, Jay.
I've looked forward to this conversation for quite some time now, man. You've shared the stage with some legendary icons such as Richard Branson, Tony Robbins, Mark Boris, and just to name a few. You have quite a bit of success, you could say, over your career. And my first question to you, which I ask pretty much all my guests to start off with, is what does success look like to you?
Look, that's a really good question. And if you had asked me that same question maybe 25, 26 years ago, it would have looked the answer would have been very different. Success to me right now is I think fundamentally for me right now, success is being happy. And, and it's where we are able to express our values that enable us to feel that things are important, and that for me right now is family. And so, my success to me is being happy and being surrounded by my family. And I feel like I'm absolutely slaying it right now. So, yeah. And I think once we do that, we shift away from, because a lot of people would say, what does success look like to you? And everyone can have a whole range of answers to that. But I think it's different for every person. I don't think there's right or wrong. But for me, over time, as I've learnt, success, I one stage I would have thought it was money, then I had it and realized it wasn't. I would have thought at one stage it was health and I had it and I realized it wasn't. I realized, success is a combination of a number of things that are, when you express them, that are important to you, enable you to feel, a particular way. And for me, that's feeling peaceful and happy.
I love that, man. When was the moment for you that you because you mentioned there earlier that if I had asked you 25 years ago, it would have been a different story altogether. But I'm curious, when was the moment for you that you sort of realized that success for you was actually happiness and being amongst your family?
I don't think it was a moment per se. I think it was moments, because I think everybody thinks they know what success looks like until they get there and go, shit. Because to me, people look at success as sometimes a goal that will get them somewhere that they're not and make them feel in a certain, a different way. And for me, I as I said, I grew up, voids breed values. We didn't have a lot of money. And so as a result, I had this massive value towards money. And so for a very long time growing up, I placed a massive value on money and the ability to make money. And I pursued money thinking that once I reached a certain enough, then I'd had everything that I thought was missing when I was a kid. And that day never came, And once I, spent enough money to work out that it was in vain, I took the time to reflect. I actually took 7 months off. Went and traveled around the world on a journey of self-discovery, to try and find out, who I was and what was really important to me. And it was probably one of the best things I've done. But there's been many moments, throughout my life where I've had to redefine or evolve what success means to me. And, I think for me, it's hard to blend it into just one.
I'm curious about the journey of self-discovery, how you went abroad and traveled the world for 7 months. What did you learn abroad about yourself and about the world during that 7-month period? Because it is a long time to travel.
It's a long time. It's the most time I'd ever taken off in my life at that point. In 7 months, I learned that it was okay to get bored. But I learned a lot about myself. But the joke's on me, because the funniest thing is I still remember as we landed in Sydney, I was by myself. I did the whole trip by myself solo. And as I landed in Sydney, I just remember thinking to myself, because I still hadn't necessarily at this point, even after 7 months, found what I thought I was looking for. I just knew I was looking in the wrong place. And I went looking out there in experiences. And when I landed, I was like, oh, shit. I just went, damn, I've been looking in the wrong place. Because because I was trying to find inner peace. I was trying to find inner happiness. And, when I traveled the world for 7 months, I went to, some of the most spiritual destinations on the planet. And everywhere I went, I was waiting for some form of a fucking Yoda to roll out and go, I've been waiting for you. You're now fixed. And, it didn't happen. Like I did Machu Picchu, and I convinced, 15 very mature, normally quite sensible people to treat, our normal 4-day hike to Machu Picchu like an adventure race and run it, because I just knew at Machu Picchu I was going to find something I was looking for. I was going to find more of me, and I did this for 7 months, chasing from thing to thing to thing. And all I'd done was gone from trying to look at money as the object, or to, cars or houses or women as the object. And all of a sudden I was now looking at experiences as the object. And I was going, well, if I can't find myself in an object, maybe I can find myself in an experience. I found a lot about myself, but it wasn't until I really landed that it was like, shit. And again, that started a whole new cascade of different journeys, in the inner realms.
Can I just say that was an insanely good Yoda voice? Damn.
Big fan. Yeah.
Far out. What age were you when you actually went on this journey?
Like I'm shit with chronology. It's about 25, 26, I think I was, 25, 26.
So around similar age of me. I'm 24 at the moment, and I didn't travel, but I went on a journey last year of discovering who I am and what I really wanted in life and finding my purpose. And I feel like a lot of young people, they sort of get stuck when they get to the challenges, and they don't really know, like they feel kind of worthless, and like, or they're chasing something for such a long time. And then when they get to it, they don't feel satisfied or fulfilled. And what I'm curious about, Kerwin, is like, I want to go to your origin story a little bit and ask you, what did you want to be when you grew up? When you, like, I know you wanted to make a lot of money.
That I can remember, Dot was a vet, because my mum used to describe me as Dr. Doolittle, because I could talk to the animals. And I shit you not, even to this day, I have a weird affinity for animals of all shapes and sizes. I love animals, and so for the longest time, it was a vet. It was a vet. And then along came Top Gun. And then it was a fighter pilot. And, and then it was around that age, because I think I was, 11, 12 when Top Gun came out. And to give context, at the time, my best mate his parents used to own the kiosk at the pool and the cinema at the Laverick Barracks in Townsville. And so I owned the cinema, and every night of the week they were playing Top Gun. And every night of the week, like at least 4 nights a week, I was sitting front row of that cinema watching Top Gun. So I've seen Top Gun, I don't know, probably 1,000 times. I used to be able to recite the whole script. But I just became fascinated with fighter pilots and the dynamics and the stress and everything else. But after that, and I started to mature, I really had eyes on being a professional athlete. And this might surprise people, but for a very long time, I wanted to be a professional bodybuilder. And I actually haven't mentioned that to a lot of people, but I was a competitive bodybuilder from the age of 14 or 15, I should say, to 19. And so during that period, there was a very strong period of time where, I was like, maybe I could, maybe I should. But that was not something that I ended up going for. I had an accident when I was 15, or just when this actually started to happen. Or I started to have this obsession, I guess you could say. And that kind of changed the course of my journey in a very significant way.
Was that sort of like your very first near-death experience when you had the accident?
Yeah, that was my very first like proper near-death experience. Fell on a broken bottle, cut my nerves, all my tendons, main artery. I had a pump of blood coming out, almost 3/4 of a meter, 13 and a half hours of microsurgery and 2 blood transfusions. So it was, it was a significant event.
So you were almost faced with death. And I'm curious, like when someone does go through a near-death experience, what was going through your brain during that time?
Well, I still remember at the time as a kid thinking it wasn't real when it happened. But then after the fact, it didn't really land as a mortality incident until a lot later, because as a 15-year-old kid, you don't really put everything into context. And so for me at the time, I didn't see it as a near-death experience. I saw it as a disabling experience because, I was told I would be disabled and I wouldn't be able to use my hand. And I had to work very hard just to get my hand back from, a 20% function to 80% function. I'm still working on the other 20%. And that period of time created not so much an awareness of, appreciation for life, but it gave me an enormous appreciation for struggle, because I was off school for 9 months. I was in rehab every single day, 6 days a week, hour and a half on a bus into the city, hour and a half to 2 hours in rehab, hour and a half out. I was doing that 6 days a week, mate. So I couldn't go to school, and not that I was fucking missing anything. I failed every subject from year 1 to year 12. I was diagnosed ADHD and dyslexic at the age of 7. So for me, I wasn't missing out on anything, but I was missing out on a lot of the social context. But it was an incredibly emotionally and mentally traumatic experience at the age of 15, already being aware of the fact that you're academically, declined or labeled that way at that point of life anyway, and thinking the only way you're going to create success in life is through some form of physical activity, because I was very gifted in sport and physical activity. And then that happened. And I was just like dealing with that as a 15-year-old kid. I started asking bigger questions like, what am I going to do with my life? So it was quite significant. And I learned how to deal with suffering. I learned how to deal with pain. I learned how to do things and defy the odds. I still remember sitting down with the doctor, the surgeon, after 12 months of rehab. They wanted to give me an assessment, and I started doing this. And he goes, "Oh my God, what you're doing is medically impossible." And so for a lot of people, I was told what I wanted from my hand was impossible. And I still even remember in rehab, there was a couple of situations where, I think everyone at home, if they can see this as a video, like just touch the tips of your fingers, because, you take that for granted. That took me about 10 months to do. And, I used to sit there shaking, just trying to touch my pinky against my thumb or any one of these fingers. And I'd be sitting there and I'd have tears streaming down my eyes. And I feel for the ladies that supported me through rehab, because I used to see this kid just torturing himself every single day at the table. I'd torture myself to the point of tears. And one time, one of the ladies came up to me and she goes, "Just let it go. It's okay. It's not coming back." And I just remember going, and I got even angrier. And that produced, as I said, it was a significant trauma, produced a lot of anger, which in itself fueled a whole range of behaviors that taught me an enormous amount about myself.
There's so much to unbox there. One thing that I'm curious about is, how have you been able to manage, because you have a lot of, I guess, traumatic experiences throughout your life. How have you been able to manage that trauma to this day?
That's a great question.
How have you been able to do it?
Learn how, by virtue of being exposed to a disproportionate number of traumas, and then, I guess experiencing the consequences of that biologically, physically, and mentally, it put me on a path where I wanted to discover, how do I regulate these systems that feel so out of whack? Because when you experience a trauma, and I had what I'd call, PTSD is a spectrum, but I had moderate to severe PTSD for a good 20, 25 years. And, to give you context, everyone's PTSD is, it presents differently. Mine, I'd have an activation. There'd be some kind of a small stress or an event or something happening that would trigger me emotionally, and I could calm myself down. But what happened is my cardiovascular system wouldn't, I'd be at 100, 110 beats a minute, sometimes for 5 to 10 days. And I've delivered countless events like that. I've delivered, I haven't had an activation now in almost 2 years, but I had to learn to live that way, whereas most people that would happen, they go, "Oh, I can't work for a week, I'm out for a week." And I don't disrespect people who take the time out to look after themselves, but that just wasn't my mindset. When I had an activation, I learned how to push through, but I kept asking the question, there's got to be better ways. There's got to be better ways. As I evolved and adapted, I learned that I could literally go around to every system in my body and learn how to regulate it. I could learn how to regulate the system of my psychology. Okay, I could learn how to regulate the system of my cardiology and my heart. I could regulate the system and the connection between my heart and my brain. I could regulate my emotional system. I could regulate my stress systems, my autonomic nervous system. I can also regulate biochemistry and biology and There's so much that we can regulate just through learning how to breathe, learning how to focus, learning how to talk to self. And understanding that, we literally do have $1 trillion supercomputer. We are, and I say to people, it's sitting between our head, but it's not. We're the best biotech on the market right now, and science would pay $1 trillion to be able to replicate us, but we're walking around like we're a fucking, a straw man, And so for me, this journey has been the pursuit of, we got this $1 trillion piece of hardware, but no user's manual. And so for me, yes, I got given all these experiences, but by virtue of these experiences, it led me to ask questions that develop processes that not only do I use now, but I teach these to business owners. I teach these to elite professional athletes. I teach these to elite military operatives. I teach these to people in high performance areas of all areas of life, because the fundamentals are the same. And that's really interesting. I guess that's been probably the best part for me.
I can relate to a lot of what you're saying because I ended up in high school in year 11. We were going through like there's a lot of stresses in my life at the time, and I was failing pretty much everything, and I ended up having a massive panic attack. That an ambulance was called to the school because I thought I was having a heart attack, and I just remember just like being so afraid, being so scared, being kind of like this out of body experience, but it's very real. And
Mm.
after that, it was sort of like this massive like smack to the face. Like I needed to put in systems and processes into my life that were going to serve me in a positive way. Because everything up until that point was all negative, was all stress, 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 stress. And I thought that I was absolutely worthless because I wasn't doing well in exams or family issues, you name it. Everything was just going pear shaped. And I realized how important breathing was. And it was funny that the paramedic actually said to me, she grabs my hands and she's like, breathe, Jay, just breathe. It is okay. You're not having a heart attack. It's just a panic attack. And then even after that, like I started adopting exercise into my life. I started like more exercise because I wasn't doing much. I started reading a lot more, started meditating a little bit more, praying, you name it. And it all sort of helped tie into because there was a lot of trauma, there was a lot of stress, anxiety, you name it. I needed to, if there was going to be another attack, I needed to be ready this time. So I thought I'd share that. Yeah, I'm curious now. Talking about, I guess you've had 6 near-death experiences.
It's actually 7, but I stopped counting. But yeah, I try to focus on it, to be honest. Yeah,
So you also had a stroke.
that was in
Uh,
the 6.
That was in
Sorry,
the
yeah.
6, right? So can you talk to me? What was the build up leading towards you having that stroke?
Yeah, look, it's a really interesting story. I was the night before I had the stroke, I was very lucky. I got invited to a discourse from a spiritual leader, Dasa monk from a temple in India called the Oneness Temple, which is a movement over there that's just essentially trying to integrate a lot of the Eastern principles in a Western fashion to integrate, some of the spiritual aspects of the cultures. And this guy came over. He was about 28 years of age, but he'd grown up in the monastery. Walked in, slim built guy in literally like a white robe. So he literally looked like an Indian Jesus. And he walked in the room, sat down at the front. And for 3.5 hours, I was mesmerized. But what was super interesting, the first 20 minutes, he sat at the front of the room. There was like 20, 25 entrepreneurs in there. He didn't say a word. He just looked at everybody. And I could see what he was doing. He was just observing and watching the discomfort that was coming up around the room was palpable and it was entertaining. And then he started with that opening and talked about 3 hours of life, love, philosophy, spirituality, internet, how it being expression of consciousness and connection. And then he goes, at the end of it, I'd like to give everyone a blessing. And he goes, you Westerners like to call this blessing a oneness blessing, but we call it a diksha. He goes, and the reason Westerners call it a oneness blessing is because when we give this blessing, you guys like to measure everything. We've looked at the brain under an fMRI, and we've observed that the parietal lobe in the brain actually starts to slow down, and the frontal cortexes start to become more active. And the parietal lobe is where we actually believe war is responsible for and conflict. And the frontal lobe is where we believe consciousness emanates from. And I was like, hang on a second, you mean war is a part of the brain responsible for war? And he said, well, yeah, it's the part of the brain that's responsible for you feeling separate from your environment. It stops you bumping into things. And she goes, so when that dissolves, you feel more connected. You feel a greater sense of being connected. But when it's there and you have two polarizing perspectives, depending on how polarizing and how emotional they are, that can create levels of conflict, and at a cultural level that can be, expressed as war. And so, where was I going with this? And then he said, okay, I want to give you this blessing. And so he puts his hands together and he starts chanting as the music plays. He puts his hands over the crown of the first guy's head. And I was just watching him. He goes, everyone close your eyes, but I'm like a 4-year-old at the best of times. And so I'm peeking out the corner of my eye, watching what he's doing. And he gets to me and then he starts shaking and I hear his voice start to quiver and I open my eyes and I look up and I remember thinking to myself, that didn't happen to the other 2 guys. And then all of a sudden I just felt quite blissful. Now I've been very lucky through my life. I've been exposed to a lot of healing modalities. Like my mother was a clairvoyant and a psychic. And so, I was taught Reiki at the age of 3 and 4 without even knowing what Reiki was. And so I've been exposed to all sorts of, weird and wonderful stuff. And so I know what a legitimate energetic healing feels like. And then all of a sudden I went, oh, and I was like, wow, this dude's legit. And so I just experienced this blessing. And then it was maybe, I don't even know how long later it was. I came back and then I opened my eyes and I looked down and there was 2 or 3 people down and he just looked at me and smiled and I didn't think anything of it. And then it was 3:58 the next day. I'll give you the shorter version. I'm standing in the kitchen with the chicken in one hand, talking to my PA, and then all of a sudden she looks at me and she goes, "I think you need to sit down, Kerwin." And I was like, "Well, why?" And then I started to realize I was talking, a bit weird. And then I looked down and my tongue was hanging out of my mouth, and I had drool just streaming down my chest. And I started laughing because I was just thoroughly entertained at the fact that I was doing this in front of someone that could actually see it, not just by myself. And she starts freaking out. "You need to sit down and ground yourself." And I sat down to touch the floor, and I had one hand that was on the floor and one hand that was twisted up here. But the crazy thing was I could actually feel the other hand on the floor. And then I lied down, and I had what I guess you'd say a near-death experience. I laid down, and I went to a few different places. All of them were black. There was no white light or no white tunnel, but all of them very distinct. The first one felt like I'd gone to a mobile phone network. And I could just hear hundreds of conversations just overlapping constantly. And then, then the second place that I went to was almost like Q&A with God. Like I just remember asking every question I asked, I just got an answer for. Everything I thought about made sense. And it was like, it's so high. It's such an incredibly almost psychedelic experience where like everything in the universe made sense. And I thought about some of the craziest shit, right, of existence. And I just understood everything. And I was like, and then I get taken to this next place, which is where I was basically offered. And again, it wasn't some dude. There wasn't a button. It was just, I remember getting the feeling that you can stay or you can go. And I remember thinking, fuck, man, I've lived 5 lifetimes. There's no shame in me bowing now. If this is my time, so be it. I remember going, look, if it's my time, I'm ready to go. And it wasn't like, oh no, take me now. I was like, you know what, dude, I'm so fucking grateful for what I've been given. I'm good. If you want to take me now. And then I woke up. Bolt upright, and then, not long thereafter got taken to hospital, and they wanted to send me home, but there was another very persistent doctor there, and sure enough, they discovered a 3/4 centimeter stroke in my right parietal lobe, of all places. And it was so funny because the doctors came back with the MRI. They said, "You've had a stroke," and then a parietal lobe. And I was like, fuck, I was only talking to this dude last night, about what happens in the brain. And they're like, "So is there any reason why, any activity that you've engaged in that you think may have led to the stroke?" And I was like, "Well, there was this Indian guy who gave me this." And they're like, no, this sounds like nonsense. And I'm like, actually, no, it's not nonsense. I've got documented actual research here that I can, because the guys actually have documented fMRI research that can show you this. And they're like, no, not interested in that at all. And they spent 2 weeks prodding me and poking me. And after 2 weeks, like, we can't find anything wrong with you. We're going to have to let you go. But I had some brain, obviously there was tissue damage there. So I had short-term memory issues, 15-second memory for a good period of time. And I had syntax errors. So I'd go to say words and I'd get them in the wrong order. It was really entertaining. But for me, it just created another challenge to memorize things, another challenge to, learn how to speak more effectively. And by virtue of that, the doctor said you wouldn't be back at work for at least 12 months. I was back at work 6 weeks later. And as a result of that experience, I've created a whole body of work around some of those questions that I asked, called The Power to Create. And, it's gone on to change my life and also many other people's lives, because it's helped me, some of those questions I believe I asked helped me understand a lot about what I'm doing right now in terms of, the performance side of life. Because I am known as the business guy, but the reason I'm so good at the business stuff is I've got good basic strategy and tactics, but I'm really good at the mental and the performance side. And so that's for me, is being able to integrate that in a helpful way. And that experience did an incredible job of doing that.
We'll get to the mental and performance side in a second, but I'm curious about real quickly. So you said the Indian mystic or whatever you want to call him, he smiled at you. So I'm curious, did you ever go back and ask him, did you know that I was going to have a stroke one day? No,
I've never spoken to that guy since. I have connected with the Oneness Temple on a number of occasions, have communicated with the guy, but no. And look, I don't necessarily think he knew what was going to happen. He wasn't a clairvoyant. He was just a monk. He was giving out blessings. And I don't know if that's necessarily on his roster. Maybe he did, but he was probably one of the most equanimous people I've ever met in my life.
It was just that just fascinated me, like, because he smiled at you, and the very next day you ended up having the stroke. I'm just trying to. Anyway, my question to you about you've been able to seek out all these questions and ask people, all these high performance people, all these questions. Is there one question that you ask yourself that you haven't been able to get the answer for yet?
No. Oof. No, not that I'm aware of. Nothing that springs to mind.
What would you say? What would you say then? It has been the worst piece of advice you have ever received from someone.
The worst piece of advice that I've ever received. Do it tomorrow. I can't think of and the crazy thing is I've received a disproportionate amount of bad advice. I think everybody who's been in business has. Okay, this is a good one. Making money the goal. Like, the worst thing you could possibly do, in my opinion, is make money the goal. And look, I've got my reasons for that personally, but there's also an enormous amount of behavioral research that suggests that when you focus on money as a prime objective, the 8 times more likely to engage in deceit, deceptive, and omissive behaviors. And that's essentially fraud, some low level or mild level or moderate level of fraud. And so, yeah, the best piece of advice encounter that I was given is just do what you love. And it seems so cliche. It really does.
No doubt. I completely get that. Like, sometimes, and I've always said that the worst piece of advice ends up being the best piece of advice anyway. So it's okay. I'm curious about, okay, so you teach high performance habits and skills and all that sort of stuff. So for someone that wants to be a high performer, do you believe that it is something that is taught, or high performers are actually born?
Look, I think there's genetics always play a role, but here's what I know. I've taught this to people of all sizes, shapes, and forms, all races, orientations, creeds, weight classes. There's no one that really can't learn. The only person who can't learn is the person who thinks they can't learn. And, if you're going to categorize it, you've got 2 types of people based on, the research from Carol Dweck. You've got people who have the growth mindset, and you've got the people who've got the fixed mindset. The people who've got the fixed mindset, it's going to be very hard to help them because they see things as they are. The people with the growth mindset, they can see things differently, and so for me, that plays a huge role.
So for somebody that wanted to become like a top business person, what would you say, what some strategies that you would give them to start off with, like to set themselves up for a great, great future?
As a business person, like, the most important thing I think you can do is get to know who you are first, because, fundamentally our ability to deliver comes down on our ability to do. And if we aren't aware of what our motives are and how we push our buttons to get ourselves to do the things that we don't want to do in the situations where we need to do them, then it's going to be very difficult, because a lot of people look to strategy and tactics. And to me, it's an extrinsic. Extrinsics are easy to acquire. The hardest skill to acquire is the intrinsic ability to drive yourself in any direction you fucking choose, to do any task you choose. And that to me is a skill set. And the more you get to know who you are, the more you understand where the belts, levers, and the buttons are to do those things. But I think most people don't spend enough time getting to know who they are, in order to understand the mechanics of the hardware and the software that they're operating. Because, as I said, you're walking around with $1 trillion computer, but most people are running fucking Word. And if you're running Word and you can be running a lot more sophisticated programs, why not run a more sophisticated program? At the end of the day, it is a choice, but it's one that has to be made consciously. And the way that you upgrade the program is by becoming familiar with the landscape, and the operating system itself, and realizing that if I want to upgrade the program, how do I do that? Well, I could download a new program, or hang on a second, this $1 trillion computer comes with an inbuilt programmer. I can actually program myself. And that in turn, lays open the doorway of, the more I get to know me, the more I realize I'm very suggestible to the things that I say myself on a regular basis. I'm very aware that I pursue these things more than these things. How can I associate more things with these things to be more motivated? Like, there are so many little things that we can do, but you can't do that unless you know who you are. And that's probably the biggest difference that I have, because our client, our K2 Elite, like, it's probably one of the most highly sought after programs in the world. And the reason being is about 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 will 2x to 10x in their first 12 months, 18 months. And you've got to understand, yes, we have great strategies. Yes, we have great tactics, best in the world. But where we really, really thrive is in the area of performance. It's a mental game. Okay. It's a physical game. It's a spiritual game. And by spiritual, I mean, there's something about feeling good for no good reason. There's something about feeling connected to something greater than just yourself, because that's where we really do learn more about what's possible.
Do you ever get sick and tired of teaching all this stuff to people?
Never. I get sick and tired of teaching business stuff because it's just very process. And I love process. I love strategy. I love tactics, but I am obsessed when it comes to human performance, like an absolute obsessive.
What's your favorite part about teaching human performance?
Seeing the results. Yeah. Seeing the results and seeing, us being able to deliver results in some cases just through a video. And that to me is the greatest part of what I do. I get, don't get me wrong. Once upon a time, I used to enjoy being on the stage. It's not about that anymore. And you can ask anyone who knows me in my circle. I just do not thrive in a high compliment environment. I do not look for compliments. I get lots of feedback and I'm very grateful for it, but it's just not something that drives me. I'm not driven by people's high fives. I'm not driven by you're amazing. I'm driven by the fact that I only 3 days ago got a message on Instagram from a guy who told me 18 months ago I was ready to take my life. And not only, have I decided not to take my life, I now, I just opened my first business and our first month is profitable, and just want to let you know I owe you my life. I owe you my life. And I don't feel that as a debt, but I feel that as a consequence of the work that I do. And I feel very privileged to be able to do that and know that the work that I do not only has great commercial benefit to help businesses perform, but it has great personal benefit. It helps improve people's lives. And that's what performance is. It's not just how do I perform better in business? How do I perform better in life? And that's what I teach people. Performance is multifaceted. Okay. It's multi-ordinate. And when you learn performance at the core, yes, you become a better business person. And guess what else? You become a better parent as a natural consequence. You become a better partner. You become a better lover. You become better at everything. Why? Because you become a better person, and that's where, I just love seeing people become better.
Speaking about relationships and parenting, I'm curious about I've got so many questions racing in my head right now, but what advice would you give to somebody, a high performer at the moment, that all they are focused on is their business and not their relationships?
I would say you would probably be very successful in the area of business, and you'll probably have levels of chaos or disorganization in the relationship. Wherever we apply attention to expands, and wherever we don't atrophies. And whatever we value, there'll be order, structure, and appreciation. And wherever we don't, there won't be. And if you don't have structure, order, and appreciation in your relationship, because you're too focused on work, then that's going to create its own set of issues for you. And this is one of the things that I've learned about performance. It's, people don't realize that, yes, I've got to go and work, 100 hours a week. Yeah, you can do that, but you can also do that in the context of a very healthy relationship. And when you do it in the context of a healthy relationship, guess what? You don't have someone who's trying to stop you. You have someone who's trying to support you. But the question is how do you develop a healthier relationship? Well, you get to know yourself. You get to know how to communicate in a more effective and more of a healthy way. But as I've learned, it's taken me 46 years now to learn this. Life is a balancing act. You never get it right. It's like spinning plates. You'll have, 5 or 6 going at any one time, and you're in the business of every now and then you break a plate, but then you just pick up another one, you put it back up, and you start spinning it again.
Do you have any regrets?
No.
Why not?
Because I wouldn't be here. Regret is a human instinct. It's not even an instinct. Regret, I think, is a human condition whereby we assume that something shouldn't have happened the way that it should. And we go, I regret doing that, rather than having complete and utter faith and trust in knowing that that was exactly what was supposed to happen. And if it was supposed to be different, it would have been different. And it happened that way because it was supposed to. Otherwise, it would have been different. When the tree falls down in the forest, you don't have all these other trees around going, oh my God, that was terrible. No, there's a great deal of non-emotion and just a process of recomposition, and that recomposition is a form of appreciation. It's the appreciation of hydration and values and fibers that can be recomposed. And that's a lot like life.
That's good. Couple more questions for you, if you don't mind. I've enjoyed this conversation. I could ask you questions like for hours, but I'll this one I want to ask you. It could be another podcast entirely, but I'll ask it anyway. How have you been able to build trust, not just in business, but in your relationships? And how can someone actually do that for themselves?
Again, it starts with self. The way you build trust with self is by honoring commitments. Self trust is self worth. And if you don't trust yourself, you won't value yourself. And so the way that we build trust is by honoring commitments. And so to me, yeah, if you can learn how to honor commitments to yourself, you'll learn first and foremost, you need to stop making as many as you are because it's hard to honor all of them. The less commitments you make, the easier the ones are that you make to honor and the better you feel about yourself. And then you start to realize, shit, this also works with other people as well. When you do what you say you will do, people start to respect you. And that's, an incredibly powerful part of the process is, creating a level of respect, I believe.
And who has made the greatest impact on your life that has given you a renewed perspective on life?
Oh, so many people. Oh gosh, I wouldn't know where to start with a response to that. Right now, it would be my intimate family. Yeah, it would be a collective of my partner, my son, and my new daughter. I've now inherited a new 9-year-old daughter, so yeah, that to me is a big part of it.
Mm. What have you learned about being a father? Like um, some of the lessons that you've gained from it.
Look, I've learned how to become such a good business person as a result of fatherhood because it's taught me a really important fundamental lesson, which is how do you lead and build trust? How do you build relationships and trust? Because again, it's one thing to honor your commitments, but how do you honor a commitment to your child, who can't talk and can't see you following through on a commitment? And that's where we've got to honor the energy. And so to me, one of the best ways to build trust outside of commitments is understanding that as parents, our fundamental role is to make kids feel safe so that they can grow. And so it is an entire journey around. Have you got kids, Jay? Are you on the band? Okay, so you've got to look forward to. But this is what we learn. Like our goal here is to develop the kids so that they can perform at their best, okay, and they can express their potential. Okay, but oftentimes we misunderstand what that looks like. We think, managing performance is yelling at people. You wouldn't yell at your fucking team member. Why would you yell at your kid? Yes, you might speak loud and stern and you might have strong boundaries and be very assertive, but you wouldn't smack an employee. So why would you smack a kid? And so I've really learned about the importance of the nonverbal dynamics of influence or leadership, as I think it's probably most ethically framed, because it's not about influence. It's about, managing a dynamic whereby, you're able to influence people with less resistance to do the right things. Whether it be clean up their room or, put their shoes on or clean up their Lego. It's a process of you can either learn how to manage parenting through domination and aggression, and that'll be a fucking conflict zone, a chaos zone, a stress zone. Okay. Or you can learn how to manage it through communication, which is going to be slower. It's going to take more time. Okay. But fundamentally, when you communicate slowly with your kids and you don't use aggression and domination, guess what? They fucking trust you. And so they're more likely to follow your direction. And guess what? The same is true with your team. If you take the time, to build and to learn and to create a safe place and make them realize that making a mistake isn't a terminal thing, and you can support them and provide them the resources. And they go, oh, it is actually safe for me to, spread my petals and fly.
And what have you noticed about love when you had your son as opposed to when you didn't have your son?
You don't know love until you have a child. Like and I'm like a fucking romantic. Like I love to love. I love the process of love. But it wasn't until I saw my son's head crown and then he came out, and then over time you just have this being that you look at and you're just like, I would literally, do anything for you. There's nothing I wouldn't do for you. I'd give you my life in a second. And to me, it's just the most beautiful experience. It can be a little bit, I can see how people get lost. They lose themselves in their kids because you find this object that you want to throw so much love at. But it's been also a great process of learning how to love, but learning how to love in a really interdependent way and giving him his space to grow at the same time, and not loving him so much that I smother his ability to be anything other than who he is, not a combination of the two of us being, one, so to speak, in a co-dynamic.
I feel like I could dive further into that, but I won't just now. Might do a part 2 later on. But I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about this unstoppable nature that you have adopted or you've created for yourself, you've also got this amazing podcast called Unstoppable. And I'm curious about, where did that actually come from? What's the story behind it?
Yeah, look, I worked out early on one of the most important systems of the body to regulate for performance is psychology. And I realized that our brains are very suggestible. And I realized that if we tell our brain a statement, condition it over and over and over, the brain will start to believe it. And so, like, many other people, I started to create my list of commandments and my strategic programming suggestions. And then I started looking for low-hanging pieces of fruit. And I was like, what is a question that I answer every single day that if the answer were to become to fruition within my psychology, if it was become a neural net and a belief system, how would that be expressed? And I was like, hang on, what's one thing I do every day? How are you? And everybody asks that, 20, 50 times a day. And so I just got into the routine. And when people say, how are you? I just say, I'm unstoppable. I've been saying it now for about, 12 years or something. And, it's one of those things. It's just a part of who I am now. It's a part of my psychology. Everyone who knows me closely knows I'm incredibly obsessive. But I am just, I guess you could say, constantly reiterating the things that I want to see expressed, and unstoppable is one of them.
Mm-hmm. I love the unstoppable mindset, man. It's so cool.
Thank you.
My second last question for you. This one's more of a fun one. What is the weirdest food combination you've ever tried?
Oof, I've tried all sorts of crazy shit, mate. What is some really crazy shit that I've tried? Scorpions. Were they cockroaches or crickets? Scorpions, crickets, snails. Yeah, it was in a market in Thailand somewhere. Oh, spider as well. Yeah. But I love my food. I do love my food. Not cockroaches and spiders and scorpions though, but I do love my food.
So what's a guilty pleasure for you?
Oh, guilty pleasure. I love to cook. Myself and my partner, we're both incredibly good cooks. So look, I'll be honest, there's nothing more than a good Taco Tuesday. I do have to say we love Taco Tuesday in our house. But anything, I can cook quite clean, but I love, steaks, fish, seafood, clean food. And I'm on the pastas a little bit, but more on the clean. I try to stay on the clean food steaks.
Mm. That's cool, man. My last question for you. This is my all-time favorite question that I ask all my guests at the end. So you've been able to reach the age of 100, and your friends have decided to put together a film for you of everything you've ever said and everything you've ever done. Then ask me how in the world they got it, or we'll call it magic. But they got it, and they show it to you on your 100th birthday. What do you want that film to say and to show about your life?
Gosh. Yeah, I'm not good at these questions. I would like my film to ideally contain as few swear words as possible.
Rated G.
Yeah. Look, I'd like it to contain, some of the most precious memories that have come from things that I've said to the people that have been most important to me throughout the different stages of my life, Because I think, we go through life and we get to the end of the life and we have people around us, but there's been so many people through our lives that have supported us in different ways that aren't, either in our life, either due to orbit or, even mortality. And so I'd love to, sit back and look at all the special moments where I've got the opportunity to have an impact in someone's lives, over the years by saying something that's actually made a real difference.
I'd watch that.
Yeah.
Kerwin, where can people find you and connect with you, man?
You guys can find me everywhere. Facebook, Instagram. Where else have we got? TikTok, LinkedIn, YouTube, Telegram. We're everywhere, mate. So yeah. And even kerwinrae.com for those of you who want some free resources. We've got a lot of performance tools on the website, a lot of business tools on the website for free. So if you guys want to get in there and get some stuff to get things ramping up in any area of your life, then kerwinrae.com.
And also check out his amazing podcast too. So,
Unstoppable. Fuck, that'd be good. Plug that. Yeah.
Kerwin, thank you so much for your time, man, for your story and everything that you're doing out there in the world. Huge fan. So thank you so much for coming on the Storybox podcast.
Bless you, Jay. Appreciate it, mate. Thank you.